Howdy, howdy, welcome to the live stream. Let me just close a few windows here and get this show. Guys, I think we just about got it. Alright, we are good to go. How's the stream doing out there for you guys? I'm getting a note from YouTube saying that we might be getting some buffering issues. Or just do you have people just give me a quick little note in the chat and let me know if it's crazy jittery or anything else like that for you. In the meantime, we'll try not to make unfriendly movements. Alright, anyway, so let's go ahead and get this rolling. It's going to be largely viewer questions based. I do have a things I want to say. Unlike a lot of shows, I don't have a ton I want to about. I really wanted to make this about answering your questions about ComicBase, about comics, anything else you got going on in mind. And if you guys are just complete pit masters in terms of smoking barbecue ribs, I may ask you all for help. I have a thing planned for later on. I'm busting in the new smoker my wife got me for Christmas. It was such a big present, she couldn't hide it, and so when she pulled up that, in the car, it's like, "Hi, Merry Christmas! Here's the whole thing. Help me unload it, please." So we gave that a shot. It was my first shot with a smoker last week. It went okay. I'm learning the ropes here, so I'm gonna be trying to. And again, we'll have some big dinosaur ribs tomorrow if this all works out. Which, of course, I better have them starting pretty much 8 in the morning tomorrow. So I think we're okay right now. Hopefully everyone's getting this. I'm going to close the widget here so I'm not distracted by it. And let's go ahead and get the show on the road. Chat, and we are... Alright, so... let me get wet and wild here in Seattle. No snow. I hear that the folks up in Pennsylvania are getting just clobbered right now. My folks are up there in Gettysburg, and they're expecting 18 inches. That's going to be really crazy for them. I hope they make it out okay out of their driveway, if nothing else. It's raining out here in Nashville. Nothing too, but it should be kind of a miserable winter day. But come on, it'll happen at some point. Hopefully, you guys have one. Okay. Alright, let's see here. Greg asked, did anyone get anything awesome for the collection this week? I did not. It's been kind of slow. The Batman 3 Jokers is pretty good, but I don't know what you guys got. By all means, put it in the chat if you want. Richard Scott says, what constitutes a point for corrections? Is the full entry is for each into the entry of the database? One for every time. So what? We'll back it up a little bit there. What Richard's talking about is when you data in is submit new or corrected data. Do you get 1 point for every little field you fill out, or do you get 1 point for the whole thing? It's 1 point for the whole thing. You get a second point if you send us a picture that we don't have for it automatically. It's not one per individual thing. And let's face it, some people may have gamed this just a little bit, where like they'll come in and submit a ton of new books and then come back a second. Which, look, we appreciate you guys doing it, period. So, the correction points are real, honestly, the rights more than anything, although free beer down 200 leaderboard absolutely stands anytime I'm out in San Diego. Or frankly, if you want to come out to Nashville. And honestly, if you're in the top 10, hell, I'll come to you. Hey, no, guys, I just really appreciate that you guys send us so much data. It keeps our editors very, very busy. It was like, hey, how are we doing on corrections? Because they were clear the night before. It's like, yeah, I got 3,000 this morning, but it's good. I have it down. It was 3,000 in the morning. I have it down to only 1,300 pending. I was like, this is crazy amounts of data we process on a weekly basis. Speaking of processing data, so well, that was fun. Okay. Alright, guys. Let's see if we can get back here now. Give me just a second. Live 2. Alright. Alright. How is our video now? If you guys could just give me a quick note in the chat and let me know if you're receiving it and how the video feels to you guys right now. Hopefully it's better. Better. Wow, we got a lot of folks jumping in all of a sudden. Okay, well, no video, but audio is better. No video at all. Let's try that. All right. That's what happens when we dump the. That's when we dump the. That's when we dump the audio switcher in the middle of the stream. All right, so guys, we're trying new stuff here, and I'm going to have to do without titles. So because I literally just pulled the power on the switcher because it was not listening to me. So we're winging it here. So bear with me. This is again the fine level of production you've come to expect from these live streams. But you know, you guys are the ones who make the stream great, so we'll work it from there. All right. So once again, questions about the correction points. Yes, it is 1 point per correction overall. It's 1 point if you send us a picture. The way you do this, for anyone who's new to the whole thing and doesn't know the whole shtick about the correction points, is if you enter any new information in ComicBase whatsoever, ideally get it right, it really helps. Highlight the entire line by clicking at the far left on the grid, right-click and choose Submit New or Corrected Data, and that sends it to our editors in a form that they can easily process. And they get a little control panel that has what we have, you have. It highlights what's different between it. They can selectively take or not take different parts of your correction, and they can work through those thousands of corrections that we get very quickly from week to week. Now, if you have also dropped your own picture onto the issue in question, and if your picture's bigger than ours, the whole thing, it's just size. So we don't really have a way of knowing that your picture is a nicer comic than ours. We do know whether it's a bigger picture. So yeah, just make your pictures bigger. If you scan them at 300 DPI full-sized and you crop them down to the whole thing, it's probably going to be at least as good as anything we've got. If you drop that onto the issue, it'll file itself in ComicBase onto the right place, and it will then become part of your ComicBase. If you then submit that to us, and it's a picture we don't have already, it'll ask if you'd like to send the picture to us. If you send it to us, then not only does it help everyone else out, but it also gets you an extra correction point. So that's the way all that correction stuff works. All right, so let's have a look here. Video's back. I said feed to 240 still bad. This is Oro. Greg says much better. Okay, well, we'll give this a shot. It's my first time just pounding the switcher in the middle of the broadcast, but we'll take it from there. Okay, so stuff I wanted to talk about today. A little bit about updates. I'll be honest with you guys, I got a couple of like really aggro emails on Monday. Came back from the weekend, and it's always bad when someone tries to reach over a weekend. I know it's frustrating for anyone who, you know, the one time you got time to play with whatever your thing is and you have trouble and there's no one around to take your call. Unfortunately, we are a small company. We don't have like offices in Bangalore where some poor guy can take your call at 3 in the morning and on West Coast time. That's not who we are. We're just a little company. But anyway, but there's some guys who are like one guy sent me the most perplexing email of them all. He was like, "Yeah, I'm really mad at you guys. I don't know what you guys are doing. You know, I upgraded to the new version and there's nothing new." And I'm like, what do you mean there's nothing new? You know, it's like I just spent 6 months of my life building all sorts of cool new stuff in the whole thing. I mean, you know, maybe you didn't discover it, or maybe there's that. But I was thinking about it, and I did write him back, and I asked him, you know, could you clarify? Is there some way I can help you? But it's a hard thing sometimes to look through the program that you know really well and look at it through another person's eyes and say, well, what would I be thinking if I thought there was nothing new? And I'm thinking, oh, it's probably something really obvious. And I'm thinking, well, he probably just went to get a new comic in there and it wasn't in there. And so he says, yeah, jerks, you got a new ComicBase 2021. It didn't have my new comic in there. And I thought, because it's funny, because we do get this question every once in a while. And one of the good things is we do answer our own helplines. So it kind of keeps us honest away, and so we can kind of see when people have trouble with something, what are they having trouble with, and usually we're in a place to either answer their question or better yet, fix how we talk about it or fix the program so it's a little clearer so we don't need to answer the question again. But this is a question where I don't really know how to answer it exactly, but I do want to be clear about what we mean when we talk about what's an update, right? And his question, you know, and his point, I think what was going on is two things. One is there's a program update. So we just released ComicBase 2021, which we're very happy about. You know, that's the one, AKA Crystal Palace. Lots of new reporting features, a lot, new want lists, a lot, some really new slick stuff. We like it a lot. We hope you give it a chance to try it out and enjoy it. But then there's a secondary thing, which is all the content that comes with ComicBase. So when you buy ComicBase, you get a year's update subscription, and that covers everything. It covers the program, it covers the content, it covers everything we do during that year. You're going to get it for free as part of the subscription. And what that does is it allows you not only to use the latest version of the program that we're working on, but every week, usually on Thursday nights, we'll put out all the new content, all the corrections, all the submissions, everything our editors have been working on, indexing all this time, any new things we scanned, picture submissions. It tends to be thousands of new items every week, and then we also grind the pricing on the market. So we take about 2.1 million price points, and we try to figure out what everything's worth this week. That all gets bundled up into a content update, which then, if you download that in ComicBase, it gets integrated into your data, and your comics get priced accordingly, and so you can know what your collection's worth at that moment. And you also get information on all the new titles, all the new issues, and so forth. And then it kind of keeps you up with the market. Every once in a great while, there's something that's so obscure, so weird that it slips through the cracks, and we have to add it later on. But the vast majority of comics that will have shipped by the Wednesday of the day of that week are going to be in that ComicBase, and so you can just look them up and add them to your database, for yourself very quickly. You don't need to add all the who wrote it, who drew it, what was the cover price. That stuff's all going to be in there typically. You're mostly going to look it up and say, yeah, I've got one of those, or better yet, you hit it with a barcode scanner and just let it beep in that you have one of those, or it's in very fine condition, and then we know it's worth $3.50 or whatever the deal is. But yeah, there are two parts to the whole thing. So there's keeping your program current, and then there's keeping your content current, and they are different, and you got to do both. Now, I wrote a kind of a lengthy newsletter thing today talking about what are all the individual bits of it, and again, I tried to put myself a little bit into the perspective of someone who doesn't know what we do here necessarily so much. And you got to kind of explain a lot of things that we just kind of take for granted. One is, it's kind of a strange idea that, like, you bought a program and it comes with, all the data, and it comes, maybe, depending on when you bought it, with another program for free. So the idea that we're kind of giving away the program along with the data as part of one subscription. That's kind of odd. Not everyone does that one. When I buy Photoshop, they don't give me Photoshop again. Well, actually, these days, when you buy Photoshop, you just pay them $699 a year, and then they do give you Photoshop. But back in the day, it's when you bought a program, you got whatever you paid for, and that was kind of the end of it. If they put out a couple of bug fixes, well, goody for you. You won a couple of new things, but you didn't expect new features. You didn't expect them to suddenly say, oh, hey, and here's 50,000 new templates that we just threw in there for you. That was not typically the way software was sold. These days, we switched a bit more to embrace this kind of subscription model where, when you buy into a plan or a program or something, you get whatever they're giving you, and it continues at least through that year. And typically, it gets a little better. As they release new things, you might get those things as they come out. You're not guaranteed to get those new things. For instance, I just dropped $600 on an update to my installer's maintenance subscription. So that black ComicBase installer that when you double-click the program, install the program for the whole time, you're running a program by a company called Caffeon. Lovely program. It does the very, very complicated work of installing software, of various sorts. We give it the list of files that we want put in different places, the registry settings that we need updated, the shortcuts, all the different things that need to happen, and then they essentially write the Microsoft installer code that makes all the magic happen using the Microsoft installer services. Well, not only was this a phenomenally expensive program, it was a couple of grand, but just to get the updates for it every year is $600. And that's just to make it so that when we have an issue, that's someone will a day later answer the call for us, and we can get a question answered. That's that's the way typically it comes. What they didn't promise me is they didn't promise me any particular set of features for that next year. I mean, really, I just paid the $600 to make it so that if we had a problem, someone would eventually get back to me. And ideally, that if they do put a little point this, point that, the other thing, releases out there into the world, that I'm going to get those. So ideally, if Microsoft ships Windows 11 and that comes out during the time, I've come to expect that if they have a version that is that works with that will be a feature that they would typically add to the program, that we would get it. But it isn't something like, and we guarantee that we're going to give you, thousands of new templates every week. That's not typically the deal. Another thing that's typical with subscription models, which is not something we do, is typically with subscription models that involve data and data storage is the second you stop paying, they tend to just go away on you. And that's another thing where we have embraced the subscription model to a point, but not all the way. Because the way the subscription model works with ComicBase is, yeah, for a year after you buy ComicBase, we're going to give you all the new content, all the new pricing, all the new program features that we come up with during that whole year, even including the next year's major version of ComicBase, if it came out during that same calendar year. But we're also, we're also going to be giving you every week all the new pricing that came out. So that's, it's something that's typical of that. But what doesn't happen at the end of that year is your program keeps running. If you decide, that let's say you bought it at Thanksgiving of this year and Thanksgiving of next year rolls over along, you're like, not really collecting that much anymore, or I don't really need it right now, or money's tight, or whatever the thing is, and you decide, okay, you get the little notice saying it's time to upgrade, whatever else, and you said, I'm putting it off. Well, your software doesn't stop running. It does just what it did the day before. It does everything it did the day before with one minor exception, which is to say you can't use the mobile app. We had a free mobile app we rolled in a year ago. The mobile app will stop doing its thing because that one is entirely free and entirely linked to your subscription. But the program itself lives on your machine. Once you've got it installed, we don't really have a way to uninstall it for you. The only thing, if you ever, buy ComicBase and are unhappy for some reason, we'll say, well, hey, we're sorry it didn't work out for you, or it didn't meet your needs, or whatever the thing is. And we'll say, please uninstall any copies you've got. We'll expire your serial number so you can't get updates anymore. But that's kind of the end of the story. I mean, it's, for the couple people that happens to every year. And, anyone who sells anything will know there's a couple people who, they thought it would meet their needs and it wasn't really quite what they were looking for. So, I mean, that happens to us too. But we don't have a way to take it off your machine. We don't have a way to like if you bought the archive edition and we gave you, 675,000 cover images that took us 15 years to accumulate, we don't have a way to take those back. You got them, so we're counting on you to be, to be at least, honest enough to say, well, look, I got my money back. I'm going to uninstall the software, but we can't take it back from you because it's on your machine. It's not on ours. We're not going to go onto your machine and take it from you. If we were like a cloud subscription model in the traditional, well, it's getting to be the traditional sense of things, it literally would be the data and doesn't live on your machine, it lives on our machine. And if that was the case, well then the second you stop paying us, well, your data is not there anymore. Maybe if we're nice, we'll keep it around for a month or two while we, dun you and ask you to, subscribe to us some more. But typically, if I rent service on any of these photo sharing services or anything else like that, I stop paying, my photos are gone. I better have grabbed them before that whole thing went there. And that's not how we roll. It's just, we were around before the internet was really a big thing. We've been here coming up on our 30th year now. Good grief. I think we're coming around in the corner on our 29th year right now. But 30 is not far away from us right now. And we came out of a model where it was bad enough that the license agreement that you sign for any software you've got says horrible things in it, like, we don't guarantee that this license does anything in particular useful. That's a standard term of computer licenses. Your computer license also will typically say you don't own the software, you're renting it from, or you basically have a paid up license to use it, but the fact that you bought it from us does not convey any rights to the software to you. That's another weird American legalese thing that applies to digital media like software, which, if I bought a painting from someone, typically, or they made me a sculpture or something, typically if I bought the sculpture from them, that's my sculpture. The weird thing in digital rights, and then sometimes it even does apply to paintings. So for instance, when we buy the cover art for ComicBase, I actually buy two licenses from the artist. I buy the one that costs a lot of money is the one that says we're allowed to use this to advertise our stuff, or to use on the first usage for use in illustrating ComicBase. But that image that they created for our covers actually still belongs to the artist. The second thing I pay them a lot of money for is I pay to get the physical painting so I can hang it in my office. But there's nothing in that license that also prohibits them from selling their own set of art prints which they have done, and I applaud that for them. I've even seen jigsaw puzzles, with the same image used on it. That's something the artist gets to do, and digital rights tend to work the same way. So, yeah, the license thing is weird, but anyway, that's something that gone down the rat hole quite a bit on this one. I apologize for all the free associating on the whole thing. I'm actually in a mode right now where I'm eagerly awaiting seeing shipment of the art for this year's thing. I, at this point, have only ever seen the digital version, just like you guys have, and it's always a thrill for me whenever I get the thing to hold in my hands and I can put it up on the wall behind me. I'll probably have to replace a couple of the robots behind me in order to make room for it, because I'm honestly running out of room in my house to for these beautiful Orbic and Bleckman illustrations I've got. They have been our cover artist ever since ComicBase 6, and they're hanging all over my house, and it's just, anyway, it's pretty cool. At some point I'll have to do a walk around and show some of this. All right, enough about this stuff. All right, and let's see. And okay, John says, surprise release installer for 2020 was about 70 megs big, and before it was about 10 times the size. And again, I'm going to apologize because I think maybe I can make this work again, getting the chromas back. When I pulled the switcher just now to reset the bit depth, I also, unfortunately, had to knock out my my video monitor I used to monitor these things. So I think we should have titles working again. Yes, there we go. Sweet. Okay, we're back. So John Pieces surprised the list. Installer 2020 was about 70 megs big. Before it was about 10 times the size. Yeah, that is one of the big architectural things we did with ComicBase 2021 is we separated the installer into two pieces. We got the idea that we'd like to be able to put updates out very frequently if we want to, and so they were very easy to download, and also make it so that downloading them and then double-clicking to run them was a really fast process, much more like updating a web browser than what we had done in the past with ComicBase installers. So what we did is we took all the big stuff that doesn't change much, and the biggest one of these is the ComicBase database itself, which ships with ComicBase in a compressed format. There's a stock database with all 900,000 image comic issues in it and so forth, which is just by itself it's nearly 400 megs. But anyway, we took all that stuff, all the stock graphics, all the things, the themes and so forth. They all became part of a separate installer. There's the report engine. There's a bunch of code that supports like the reporting functions and so forth. That gets installed once. The very first time you run ComicBase, you probably saw it downloading prerequisites. That's what it was doing, is it was downloading the other half of itself. But then that meant that the main program installer could be really quite small. 70 megs for the, I believe, for the Express and the free versions, and it's actually as little as, I want to say, about 50 megs for the Pro and the Archive. Anyway, so those ones, again, can download very quickly. It did introduce some technically pretty difficult, stuff for us in order to get the two-part installer working properly, and that's one of the reasons I paid the $600 to the installer guys, because I spent a lot of time over the last year working with them to make that two-part thing work. And as I probably mentioned before, but I still haven't given up hope for it entirely, is at the moment there's no way to handle the picture install the same way without overwriting your pictures, but I would love it if someday we could find a way to make it so that you could hit one thing, it would download all jillion gigabytes of pictures all in one go, and you wouldn't have to separately download lots of files. I think that would really just simplify a lot of things for people. So I'd like to make that happen, but at the moment there's no technical way to do that doesn't wipe out any pictures you've already made yourself, and I can't have that, because if you've taken the time to scan your own pictures, there's no way we're wiping those out. Okay. Let's see here. Andre said, the catalog's done, first draft, bit less than 3 gigabytes. Weekly update at the end of the year would be bigger and hopefully more than double that of the first. So what Andre had done is something really cool. He's actually gone and created a Photoshop, it's like a pictorial catalog of all the pictures that are in the ComicBase database if you have the archive edition, and just as a big old PDF, so you have little thumbnails to see what all the pictures look like. What he's almost done, and I wonder if I've got it here. No. I'm seeing if I could spot it on my bookshelves here, but sadly I've moved things around. Oh, hang on. All right. What he's essentially done is, in his own way, recreated the impossible to find Gerber guides to photojournal guides to comics, which is, and if you bought these books, these things were $1 trillion. There's a guy named Ernie Gerber who, in I want to say the 70s, ran around with about 1 million rolls of film, found people who had old comic books, and photographed them painstakingly, and compiled them into giant volumes, which would just have every issue of every comic he'd seen up until that point. I just happened to grab one of the Marvel ones. He did 4 volumes in total. They cost like $100 a volume. But he did a couple for Marvel, a couple for General Golden Age ones. In many cases, they're the only picture anyone has ever seen of that comic. And thank God it was in the time before slabs, so it was something where, like, you could just see, if you want to see Feature Comics number 14 in all its glory, this was going to be the best shot you ever saw of it. Unfortunately, it was also in a thumbnail that was this big, so that was a limit to the whole format. What we tried to do, one of the early goals of ComicBase when we first started, we thought, well, God, wouldn't it be great if we do something as amazing as the Gerber guide, but we could make the pictures bigger because we're not limited to the physical size of them in the way that Ernie Gerber was. And like him, we spent many years doing it. But whereas Ernie Gerber again traveled the country with hundreds of rolls of film and assembled 20,000 comic illustrations for his things, we're now up to 670,000 comic illustrations, because we had the advantage of doing it in a different time, and we had the advantage of being able to aggregate our work with that of all of you, and have the internet to help us, get resources from the world over and so forth. And so it's really an amazing time to be in. But honestly, the Gerber guys are where the thought all started behind a lot of the presentation, and it's really kind of neat. What Andre's doing is he's kind of done a little return to form there of just coming up with a big old PDF where it looks a lot like the Gerber guide. So I'm chuffed to see that you did that. I'd like to see how that develops. So we'll keep watching that. All right, let's see. Joe Young wants to see how to illustrate the new want list option. Sure, absolutely. Hopefully it's an easy question. Let me go ahead and launch ComicBase over this one, and let's get that going. ComicBase, where have I got you open right now? Okay, I've got you on the wrong monitor, of course, but let's go ahead and get this rolling. So switching over to monitor 2. At least I thought to do that this time. All right. So you have to work with this one for a second. This is my actual database. Actually, I'm going to do one other thing before I get this rolling, because when I pulled the plug on my switcher, I knew I was going to mess my video settings. So let me fix this before I wind up complaining about it for the next 10 minutes. All right. Boom. All right. I'm putting my resolutions back in order. Okay. Let's go ahead and launch this sucker again. And there we go. Sweet. Okay, so here's my database here, and let's go ahead and let's go to the reports menu, and I'm gonna go to the wanted list. Now this is legit. This is actually stuff I'm looking for right now. The idea is, if I've ever marked an item as wanted, which is just a field in any item, it's a checkbox field. You can just say I've wanted or not. Anyway, those are the things that are going to appear here on the wanted list. Now, I can do it for the current title, for all items. So if you want to see my entire want list, that would be it. One thing that's important to note is this option down here. Hey, and the zooming actually worked properly for once, for just a moment. There's a menu item right down here at the bottom which says Exclude Owned Items. That's important. You should leave that checked unless you're doing something really strange. The idea being, if you had once said I want it, but then you bought it and you didn't do what, well, honestly, you did what all of us would do, is you said, okay, great, I got it, and you forget all about it then because you've got it now. But one thing you don't do is you don't take it off, you don't unmark it as wanted. So anyway, what this does is it says, if I've actually got something in stock, don't bother including on the report if the quantity is not 0. So let's go ahead and do this now. I can also have an option here. I can choose to display different levels of covers that go with it. This is super useful if you have the archive edition. You can, if you have different custom fields that you want to show, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to do the basic report right now, and I'm going to do a preview of it right now. So do that right now. Give it just a second. It's putting that together on the other screen, of course. All right, and the wanted list appears, of course, on the other screen. But I will move it over to the right screen, right here. And here we go. All right, so here's my wanted list. Yes, I would love to get the Spider-Man omnibus, but yes, as you all know, this is where my heart really lies. The DC graphic novel collections from DC Comics, the omnibus is right there. Those are the ones I don't yet have. Another thing, if you guys are looking for something to get me for Christmas, is over here in the EC archives. I love the heck out of the EC Comics, as you guys remember from the Halloween show. And these are the ones I'm still looking for. The EC archives, by the way, are reprints, very, very faithful reprints, ads and all, of the old comics from EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, all those great ones from the 1950s. They've been reprinted by Russ Cochran Presents, Gemstone, and Dark Horse over the years. And right now, I want to say Dark Horse is going back for a second run of them. I saw on Amazon that they were coming out in paperback soon. So that's probably going to knock the price down on these ones, because even though these are reprints, like the Tales of the Crypt #1 over here, 135 is honestly, it's a little bit of an optimistic price to find the reprint, and these should have been $45, $50 volumes, but they're getting expensive because people, there's a lot of collectors like myself who just love these. Anyway, that is how to use the want list. If there are any other questions on that one, please get in touch with me in the comments, and I'll link to it as well as I can. All right. Let's see, Andre. Let's see. Can't see a link. And Ariel says, yeah, I still have his set of 4 photo guides. Good on you, man. All right. Let's see. Looking for... Okay, I think that was the end of those questions in the chat. I'm going to try to keep up with these as best as I can, because, like I said, I do want this to be mostly a Q&A question for the whole thing. I do want to answer a couple questions that have come up just in tech support, and hopefully they're of use to somebody. First thing I want to say is, and please, if you guys are using OneDrive or Dropbox or Google Drive or any of these sharing utilities, this is what I would consider an emerging tech support issue for us, and it's one that we can't do a damn thing about. So this is me as the official corporate shill of ComicBase, getting a little bit publicly worried about a trend. So I put out a long newsletter article about it today. Please take the time to look over it. But I'll go through the basics of it here. So if you guys are familiar with Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive and so forth, these are utilities, and more they're coming pre-installed with your new computer. What they're meant to do is they're meant to allow you to have a magic folder on your computer that if you drop things into it will get automatically synced up to a folder on their server. So for instance, we use Dropbox here at ComicBase to sync up work that we do between the California office and our office. We do it all the time. When you guys submit pictures to us, they're magically shared between our main server and Nashville by way of Dropbox. They're in these magic folders where any account that's signed into it automatically gets that copy of the one that once upon a time was just on somebody's computer. So it's a pretty neat service, and used for the way they should be used, it's a great way to do, amongst other things, not only just share your stuff, but also to back up your stuff, because everyone who's ever had a laptop knows someday that laptop is gonna die. It's either its hard drive is going to die, it's going to get stolen out of the coffee shop, it's going to get ripped off out of your car, you're going to drop it on the pavement. But that laptop, from the moment you buy that laptop, is going down one of these days. And you don't want to lose all the data that was on that laptop, which is why more and more we're seeing these services pre-installed along with the other software on your laptop. Well, that's all well and good, but there's a couple things about that I think we're finding out from tech support calls. A lot of people don't really grasp how they work, or what is this OneDrive thing on my computer, and it's leading them to do things that wind up being potentially really bad. One of them is this, and I'll single out OneDrive for special punishment in a moment, but let's start with the basics on this one. So the first thing is, there's a way databases work, which is not great for use with cloud syncing utilities. So in particular, if I open up, let's go back over to the screen here. If just by opening up Pete's inventory database right here, this is a file. It's about 800 megabytes in size. It's a gigabyte maybe if I'm installing updates at that moment. But it's a pretty hefty file, right? The second I go anywhere in this database and do anything with it, it's going to change data in the database. That's one thing about databases; they're constantly being written to, and so you're always going to be making little changes. You're marking the file as this, what the computer guys would do considers, they say you're marking the file as dirty. Well, what happens then is the second I go and I change that quantity from 0 to 1, or I go to another field and that gets remembered as the last title I was on, or whatever the thing is that I'm doing, all of a sudden I have to worry that this cloud syncing, if this database is living in one of those cloud syncing locations, one of those magic folders that like Google Drive or Dropbox wants to manage, suddenly it's going to want to, on the basis of me having changed 1 byte of data, it's going to want to put 1 gigabyte of data up onto the server, and so it's going to pound the bejesus out of my internet connection for a while until it does that. And then I go to another title and it does it all again. And lather, rinse, and repeat for as long as I've got that database open. So you can see that as long as I'm doing that sort of work, if I've got the database running, it's just my internet connection is going to go to garbage very, very quickly. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that databases are weird in that they don't live all in your computer's memory or all on disk usually at the same time. Because databases are meant to be able to get very large, larger in many cases than people had memory on their computer. What the technique arrived with is that they only load as much of themselves into your computer's memory as needs to be done at any given moment. The rest of the time, so you have a little bit of your databases in the essentially kind of hanging in the air in your computer's memory. The rest of it's on disk. Well, the thing that's getting backed up, remember, is the disk over here. If some critical stuff you just changed is still in your computer's memory, it hasn't been flushed back to disk, or let's say something about the state of the database itself is not quite the same between what your computer's memory knows and what the disk knows. Backing up this part is going to lead to nothing good. It's best case, it's an incomplete copy of your database. Worst case, it's a database copy that can't even be opened. So all that database network speed you've been pounding away at while you're using the database, if it's in your synced up folder, it's really for nothing. And so you're not doing yourself any good. The only time it's any good is when you exit ComicBase. It flushes everything out of your computer's memory. It writes out a solid copy of the database onto your disk. At that point, if you back that up to the cloud, well, that's actually useful. But that's the only moment it's useful. All the other time you had the thing open, it was really wasting a lot of time for nothing. All right. So that's why you never want to have your active database be in this Dropbox folder or this Google Drive folder to start with. But there's one last horrible, horrible thing that can happen. That is, you know how your computer has a clock, and you know how their server over at, Backup Central has a clock. Well, the term of syncing something is the idea is that if you have a more recent copy of something than I do, right? Well, then you're going to give me that more recent copy, and I get, and you get rid of my older copy. And if I have a more recent copy, like if I open up a letter to Grandma and I type a few new sentences into it and I hit save, the server says, hey, he's got a newer copy of that file than I do. Let me throw away my copy and I'll take, his copy instead. Well, the problem on that comes into, what if my clock's off? So what if what I think is true isn't quite true? Maybe it's off by a minute. In that case, what can happen, and we've actually seen this, and it's a perplexing tech call, because you get this one, you can't quite believe what you're seeing on the other end of the line, is that you're watching someone enter some things in the ComicBase. You can see that they changed the data, they exit out of ComicBase, they come back a minute later and all those things are gone. And you're like, what the heck happened? And what happened is the server had a clock setting that was a little bit ahead of where the local computer's clock setting was. Only needs to be a minute. It doesn't need to be much at all. At which point, what the server was doing is every time you exited that database, it said, oh, I see you're done with the file. Oh, wait, by the way, I have a more recent version of that file that you just changed. Let me copy it back down onto your machine. And lather, rinse, and repeat, it would keep on wiping out the person's work. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So what's the lesson of all this? and again, I will get back to specifically beating up OneDrive in a minute. The lesson is, if you're going to use any of these cloud syncing utilities, never use them for your active database directory. So let me show you where that is. Let me go here in just a second. Sorry, I did that thing where when I flip the magnification, it tends to hose up the mouse on my computer a little bit. So give me a second to get that freed up. I think I used to remember the trick to doing it, and I'll see if I can figure that out. Give me just a second. Have we got it again? Yes, we have mouse control again. Sweet. All right. So back on the computer. So what you want to do is, first of all, if you wondered where your computer keeps its database, period, let me show you a quick way to find it. I mean, I'll tell you where it is, but in case you're ever wondering, let me show you. So we always show you the name of it right up here in the title bar, right at the top. But if you come up under here and you go to the File menu, go to Collection Statistics. Give it just a second because it's grinding away at my prodigious collection. All right. And you click over here on the Database Info icon over on the far right. All right. At that point, at the very top, it'll tell you the exact path where this where this database lies on my machine. C, users Peter Bickford, typically it's your users directory. That's what all this comes down to. Documents. So if you ever see a folder on your computer called My Documents, that's what it amounts to. It's your name on your C drive under Documents. Human computing, ComicBase databases, and then the name of my database, right? That's where this whole thing lives. All right. Let's say I wanted to use this whole thing with Dropbox, right? What I want to do is I don't want to save a copy of my database inside the Dropbox folder. That, as we've explained before, would be death. What I could do instead, though, is I could make it so that my computer backs up to the Dropbox. That's perfectly good. The way I do that is I come up here into the Setup menu, I go to Preferences, and let's have a look down here at the backups. So by default, it's going to automatically back up your database when you exit the program. By default, it keeps 5 backups. And here's the setting right here. Save backups to the same folder as the original database. So right now, my database lives inside the My Documents Human Computing ComicBase Databases folder, and so do all the backups. Well, what I would do is I would change that, so I'm saving all my backups instead, and I'd go over to my Dropbox and maybe make a make a ComicBase Databases folder right here. Here's the Customer Databases folder. Save it inside there. And now when I exit ComicBase, when it makes a backup, it's going to save it into the Dropbox. Why is that a good thing and it was a terrible thing to use the main database out of the Dropbox? Well, again, if I use the main database out of the Dropbox, every time I change 1 byte in my database, it's going to keep on trying to pound that internet connection to flush it out there. Now, when I exit ComicBase and it makes a backup, only the backup, and I'm done with it now. The database is closed, but only the backup will ever get tried to be synced up with Dropbox. And so that actually works great. So that way, if this was on a laptop, my laptop got stolen or something like that, even if I'd never backed up to the ComicBase cloud or anything else like that, I would have a backup at Dropbox. And so that's the way to use these things with Dropbox or Google Drive if you're going to use them. All right, now let's talk about OneDrive. All right, OneDrive. Oh boy. Okay, it's a Microsoft product. It's technically very good. It works the same as all the others. It does a lot of really good things. You have to know, importantly, it comes bundled in with Office 365. And when it comes, so when you bought your new Windows 10 and it came with that advertisement saying, "Oh, buy Office. Office is great. Try it free for 30 days." Whatever the deal was, or maybe they gave you a free year of it with your academic thing, or whatever the deal was. It came in there and it wants to turn on OneDrive. Well, in addition to turning on OneDrive, the default configuration we've seen in many cases is horrifying, because what it does is it actually takes your Documents folder, that C users Peter Bickford folder, whatever else, and it maps it. It actually takes everything that was in there and shoves it into C users Peter Bickford OneDrive, and then sticks the Documents in folder inside there. It basically kidnaps your Documents folder. It moves everything else within its realm. It makes it a part of a OneDrive folder instead. It actually leaves a little shortcut behind saying, "Where did all my files go?" Which, that's not horrifying at all. But what it did is it just took control of your entire Documents folder. Well, When it did that, it also took control of your ComicBase databases folder, which means that your database is now doing the thing we said, please never do this because it'll hose you. Which is you're actively backing up you're actively running your main database out of a OneDrive managed folder, which means every time you open ComicBase, it's trying to back it up and forth to OneDrive. You're still at risk if it ever gets out of sync with your clock, and you're going to murder your internet connection. So it's all bad. And OneDrive never asked you. Microsoft never asked you. If you read any of their literature on the subject, or when you installed the program, they never asked you whether you wanted OneDrive turned on specifically. It probably came pre-installed that way, and it probably came pre-installed with it automatically set up to kidnap your documents folder. So what do you do, right? All right. Well, the first thing, and this is a completely rational thing to consider doing, is uninstall OneDrive. I mean, I gotta say, I have a little bit of an issue with software that's that presumptuous about taking over core areas of my computer and backing them up without explicitly asking me, did I want that done? So uninstalling OneDrive is a completely legitimate thing to want to do, and I wouldn't fault you for a second if you did it. If you don't do it, what I would do at minimum is go into the OneDrive app and tell it to stop backing up your documents folder, or go into, there's a folder selection deep within the settings, to at the very least tell it to stop messing with the human computing folder inside the documents folder. If for some reason you find you can't do that, or you're unwilling to do that, then it's time to move your ComicBase database outside of OneDrive's reach. Move it to a different drive, move it outside to a different folder, etc. But the idea that OneDrive would come in there, that Microsoft would configure it to pre-configure to take over your documents folder, to, again, do all this stuff without ever asking you and put you in a position where, frankly, you can lose data, is horrible. We've had to warn about it in the past. It seemed like for a while they were switching up their default installs, but we're seeing a recent spate of people who got laptops for Christmas and so forth, who were having to do remote tech support for them and so forth, and we're seeing the same kind of mapping we saw back then. So watch out for OneDrive. Google Drive and Dropbox both set up a separate folder by default, so you have to know to copy things into those folders to try to get them synced. OneDrive is the only one of these sync utilities I've seen so far that actually goes and is so presumptuous it just takes over your documents folder, and that is crazy to me. So watch out for that one. If you guys need more step-by-step on that one, do check out the newsletter I sent out right before the show. All right, let's have a quick look at the chat. Let's see how we're doing here. Okay, and which treat? Okay, Jeff says, worst I've seen on OneDrive, it makes a copy of something like that happens, usually when I open the database on a laptop. Great, because that's not confusing at all. All right, and all right, okay, and some more talk about the other bit there. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're actually doing okay for time for once. Ha, great, for once, we may finish on time. So I'm going to be brief. So I made and look, this is a little bit of a ongoing joke. You'll realize that by now I'm 53 years old. I'm a dad. I have dad humor for the most part, especially when I'm in corporate shill mode like I am right now. So I'm not going to be doing anything the slightest bit edgy on camera in front of my YouTube channel. That's not a thing. Anyway, but you'll notice that as part of the promo for this one, I was saying, we have our standard, dad joke about the eggnogs, or the elves are hitting the eggnog and so forth. That's usually the joke we put out when we talk about why certain horrific typos made it into our Christmas mailings and so forth, when we sent things out a little too fast. And for all I know, I just sent one of those out before the show. But we were talking about, it's like, the elves are going to hit the eggnog, and we'll have as much fun as we can until YouTube, under YouTube's constantly changing censorship guidelines. And you're sitting there going, well, what's Pete going on about YouTube censorship guidelines? And it's funny because I thought about, half the time I don't know what I'm going to say before, when I'm on the air, but I thought, well, am I going to say anything about this? Because I got a note before showtime. It was about a day before showtime last week, which is unlike anything I've ever seen while doing these streams on YouTube. It wasn't to me, it was to everyone on YouTube. And I thought, well, geez, do I want to get involved with this? Because again, right now I'm in full-on corporate shill mode. Whatever my personal politics are and things like that, it's nothing to you guys. It's not for what kind of show this is. And honestly, I don't talk politics, especially not as a corporate shill, except in very, very broadly defined manners. One of the things, that one of the very broadly defined realms that I would, because now I'm representing human computing now, that I would take a political stance on is I am pro-free speech. I am pro-free speech almost absolutely. Now, why, as a corporate citizen right now, would I be saying I am pro-free speech and making a big deal about free speech? Basically, I'm in favor for the same reason fish are in favor of water. Because there's nothing courageous about this at all. It's just, I literally come from a perspective that says if we can't talk, we can't think. If you prohibit what I'm allowed to talk about, you prohibited what I'm allowed to cogitate, to say as clearly as I'm capable to, to whatever arguments I'm willing to make and so forth. But more importantly, when you say what can and can't be said, you're saying what thoughts can ever be expressed in the society. So I'm sitting there going, all right, again, this is not a very political channel, so why is this becoming an issue? Well, because the day before last week's show, YouTube put out a notice, again, like I've never seen before, which said, all right, we played nicely, I'm paraphrasing only slightly, but basically said, we played as nicely as we feel like playing, but it's now December 7th, the electors have been counted, and after Wednesday, if anyone posts any messages indicating that they think that there was widespread fraud in the recent election, we'll pull down your video. And then they left it ambiguous as to whether it would also count as a strike against your channel, which is to say, if you have the opinion that there were shenanigans wherever you felt there might have been shenanigans in the election, not only are we going to say that this is a thought that can't be said on our platform, but we may treat it as a strike against you, and if there's 3 of those, you're gone. Your channel's gone. Now, again, this is not a political channel. What's in it to me, right? I mean, I don't have talks about elections on this channel. But I do get really worried when you sit there and say there are thoughts that cannot be said on an entire medium. It's like I'm talking on the telephone with somebody and I say, hey, did you hear that thing about Russia? And then the line goes dead. That is literally what you're doing when someone like YouTube says we're going to say there's only one thought that can be said about something and no other thoughts may be said. So, look, I got to come out against this and say this is insane. That whether you agree, don't agree, are ambiguous about it, have doubts, have whatever your thought is. The idea that you merely saying what's on your mind about it, without being violent, without being crazy and inciting, violence against people and things like that, but merely having an opinion that's not the official opinion, could get your video pulled or your channel banned. That's insane, guys. And we can't stand for this. But then you have the problem of, well, okay, but YouTube's private property, right? I mean, it is. I'm currently right now using servers that belong not to me. I'm not paying for the bandwidth right now. YouTube is, right? Now, they are at some point, they have the option to monetize my bandwidth. And matter of fact, that was another thing they threw down in the change of services about a week before that. It says, whether we're paying you for monetization or not, we can monetize your stuff. So whether or not they ever kick money back to me and they run my stuff in an ad, no, it's on their channel, they can run it. And I agreed to that by essentially staying on their channel. Now, look, as we were choking on bandwidth at the beginning of the show, I'm not exactly, swimming in bandwidth to spread video messages to the universe, not while keeping the mechanics of ComicBase itself running. So, look, you got to pay the piper at some point. But the idea you're going to pay the piper with the speech itself, wow, that's a pretty damn far bridge. So I gotta say, look, the reason big tech gets away with stuff like this is due to a thing called the network effect. The idea being, we can't just say, look, that's a crazy policy, we're going to take our business elsewhere, because in many cases, if we took our business elsewhere, if we went to somebody who didn't feel like I need to censor, that there's only one point of view on something, that you'd lose all the followers. I would instantly lose any subscriber I've got here. And again, God bless all a couple hundred of you. I mean, I'm not someone with 500,000 followers, although I've seen people with millions of followers get hosed off YouTube because they said something unpopular. But, typically there's a cost to not being where everyone else is. Now, this is, I think, where YouTube is miscalculating, because you look at something like Facebook, where Facebook started out as that place to look up your old college buddies and say, hey, I haven't seen you since like 1988, man. What have you been up to? And how's your family? Blah, blah, blah. And it was a way to connect with people that you never, you rarely see. You wouldn't know their phone numbers if you got to them anyway. And honestly, half the things you could do on Facebook only work if everyone else is on Facebook. So if you go over to a site called MeWe or or any of the other ones that competing with it, they don't work because not everyone else is already there, and so you could sit there and talk to yourself for a while, but that's not really the point of those platforms. I think YouTube miscalculated on this one in a pretty profound way, in that YouTube, most of what it does is not social in that we're not equally chatting with each other. We chat in the chat, but it's mostly me babbling on and you guys saying sensible things that I then have to comment on. But it's there's a pretty big factor of its broadcast as opposed to just a big wide-ranging conversation with lots of folks there. And that's not as bound to a particular point in time. So if I were to switch to another provider next week, with suddenly Odyssey or some other type like that to do the whole thing, yeah, there'd be a little bit of a problem logging in if you want to comment on the chat. And so for the 1 out of 10 people who sees this who wants to comment, they've got a little bit of a barrier to do that, but everyone else can watch the video just like you're watching it now. So I don't know, YouTube, which is to say Google, because Google owns YouTube. Was this a good play on yours? I mean, was it really worth it? Because let's face it, I don't think you've got us by the place you'd want to grab someone in the way you do, that you want to start grabbing and pinching like this. So I don't know. I'm gonna say right now, again, I'm playing in your playground. I got to abide by your rules, but I don't know that I got to play in this particular playground forever. So that's where I'm thinking about it. Just do a quick check of the chat, and then let's get out of here. Next install OneDrive or Paint 2, just installed it, thanks. Greg says, I use Apple's Time Machine, so I get the auto backups. You're only using the local copy. Yes, I love that a lot. Okay, Greg wants to remind everyone, don't forget that we have a dedicated thread in the ComicBase message boards where you can request live streams, so forth. Okay, oh, and Greg has a pull list discussion there. That I think I need to chat in for. All right, Matt. ComicBase catalog is coming from Andre. Andre, once again, thanks for doing that. That is cool that you're doing that. And let's see here. Yes, the alienization thing. And I'm sorry, dude, Greg, you're trying to get me in trouble here. It's like, I can't talk about the thing. Ixnay on the alienate. It's just, I don't know, man. Guys, this is crazy. 2020, but I don't know, man. I don't know where it all said we check our liberties at the door, and I don't know that we should go down this easy. So anyway, and like I say, and that's come from me in corporate shill mode. You ought to see when I've had a couple beers with me, I'm talking just for myself. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you next time. If you did like this one, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and let's see if we can get that subscriber count up a little bit before we get pulled off the planet. Talk to you guys later. Bye.